There are two sides to the coin that is understanding Dragon Quest. There's the retrospective and there's a modern view. The historical significance to the first 3 Dragon Quest games, which are what this video series will be about, is undeniable. It's interesting what impact these games had when they first came out, how design decisions worked out for the audience back then, like how cryptic BS got people talking about the game and almost made them a social event, but multiple versions of that video already exist. I also don't want to get hung up on technical aspects like aspect ratio, outdated save systems or anything like that. So if we take away the historical context and the technical limitations, what's left? I will explore how the games come across to a modern audience and what I perceive to be the core elements that make each of the games tick. Our standards have changed, our RPG literacy has greatly improved, so it's impossible for us to have the experience that a contemporary audience was able to have 30 plus years ago. But we're able to have an entirely new experience that never existed before, and certain parts of these games stood the test of time. Further, I do not want these videos to devolve into hating on the games. We can argue about their enjoyability, but they aren't recommendable. It would be disrespectful towards these groundbreaking games that laid a fundament that the industry has been building on for decades if I implied they haven't been surpassed 30 plus years later. The only reason to play these games is a historical curiosity if you're a hardcore fan, and yet they keep being remade. Even the older remakes like the Game Boy Color version in 2000 were not recommendable back then. That was the year that Final Fantasy IX or Dragon Quest VII came out. And with all the great RPGs that came in between, the remakes of these old games were never good enough to be worth playing over contemporary games. But why do these games keep being remade? Is this just about money, making a quick buck without creative input? If you're playing these games for only historical curiosity, the remakes aren't the same experience. Even if they are faithful like the SNES remakes, they're similar, they have tons of overlap, but this fight is not the same as this fight. This song is not the same as this song. And exploring this world feels different from exploring this world. The experience is almost always better in the remakes, but it's never as good as industry standards. At this point I want to go on a side tangent since I often see people talk about how games used to be better but microtransaction ruined everything. The trend is always upwards. I'm not saying that new games are automatically good and old games are automatically bad, but there's a strong correlation. It's that way with not just most media but most crafts. Muhammad Ali in his prime wouldn't be a modern day champion. Again, it would be disrespectful to imply otherwise and disregard all the contributions that different people made to the sport of boxing over the years, and making a comparison video of some modern day light sparring and an old school fight with funk music in the background doesn't change that. In the same vein, most arts have advanced very far, and while nostalgia might lead you to believe otherwise, there's more and better art than there used to be. It's easy to be cynical and believe that music was much better in the 90s because stars nowadays are all nothing more than cold corporate products of the soulless music industry that cannibalizes itself. Meanwhile, there's hundreds of talented artists out there that put their heart and soul into their craft, but only get a few thousand monthly listeners because they aren't what's popular right now, or they don't have the means to, or priorities stopping them from advertising themselves. If someone truly believes that any field was better back in the day, they simply don't like current trends and don't bother actively looking for quality art that is made to replicate outdated vibes and therefore not trending. Complaining about trends is something else. You might not like the most popular video games right now, but it doesn't make the greatest of the less popular games worse than what used to be trending in your youth. So to go back to the main question. What value do these remakes of retro games hold? There's a few timeless aspects to these games, a sort of soul. The remakes cannot and should not be the same experience as the original game, but there's a core. the feeling a game used to invoke in a contemporary audience that a modern audience might no longer be able to experience with the original. Frustrations like the convoluted menus of the NES games and the limited bag wouldn't have bothered the contemporary audience as much, and removing such bothers only preserves the original feeling. I don't want to limit these videos to only the original feeling, but I want to try and make out the core elements that make each game what it is. The story is obviously one of them, but it doesn't play a big role in these early games. There are stories that age well and ones that don't, and the ones that do are usually about the human experience. A movie like American History X is always going to be relevant, because even if skinheads were to disappear, for as long as humans exist, hate groups will continue popping up. And the motives and rhetorics aren't much different when we compare the group depicted in that movie and something closer to modern like an incel forum. Early Dragon Quest stories live and die by the setting, and that fantasy setting was so influential that we've now seen it a million times. This made them age very poorly, and it's hard to get excited over the Dragon Lord having a second phase. This doesn't mean a remake can't add more to it and spice up the experience, but there are some limitations. Technically, adding another form to Dragon Lord at the end of a Dragon Quest I remake would better preserve the feeling a player would have had back then, but it would make the remake seen as less faithful, which makes the solution less than ideal. My stance on this is that a remake that tries to just be the same game again is redundant, and rediscovering the soul of a game is more important than appearances. Introducing a younger audience to old games via a remake doesn't have inherent value in my eyes. Not when they aren't good standalone experiences, and especially not in an age of emulation where the old versions of each game are widely accessible. In the actual flow of the videos, all this would sound extremely negative if I brought it up for every game. So I will simply not mention the bad parts of the story. But just like the big disclaimer that none of these games are recommendable, no matter how much I personally love them, I will keep this out of the following videos to not make them seem like I'm out to defame these games. The fact of the matter is that the mobile and Switch remakes of these games were bad. They came out in 2019, meaning years after Dragon Quest XI, and there's an undeniable gap in quality. You can argue that it's an unfair comparison, but Dragon Quest XI and the Dragon Quest I remake were both competing for people's time. If someone's first experience with Dragon Quest is one of those shoddy remakes, that's not a good first impression. But people got hooked on the originals back in the 1980s. This is where this video idea comes in. Again, I do not want to go too deeply into what it was like back in the day, and I don't want to focus solely on the shortcomings of both the old and new versions. But most importantly, I do not want to get hung up on surface level stuff that doesn't matter. I want to reveal the soul, the diamond in the rough that will always exist at the core of these games. That theoretically, even if it's been covered in dust over all those years, can be revealed and polished by a good remake. Now here's to hoping I don't get too many comments telling me that I'm underselling the historical relevance of these games.